Hey everybody, my name is Evan Pundyke. I'm the marketing director here at Arrive Logistics. We have a fantastic presentation for you. This is actually being brought to you by not just Arrive, but by FreightWaves, by Reliance Partners. We're going to take a minute and talk about who everybody is before we jump in. I'll do a quick spiel on Arrive. We're not trying to make this about us. We are a 4-year-old freight brokerage. In the last 4 years, we've really experienced a lot of explosive growth, and we attribute that to just remaining focused on our customers and our carriers. You can see some stats on how much we've grown in the last 4 years. We're up from 10 to 450 employees. We're serving 2,500 active customers. We're on pace to move 250,000 loads this year and generate $330+ million in revenue. I also wanted to mention just a couple features on your end. So if you have questions throughout, which I'm sure you will, you have a question and answer box. You can type them in. And we'll be on the receiving end of that. And at the end, we'll take some time to go through all the questions. And if there's any comments, maybe some technical issues or anything you're experiencing, there is a chat box, and I'll be on the other end of that. So if there's anything we can do to help you out, we will make sure to do that. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to John, who's going to talk a little bit about what he does at Reliance, and then kick this thing off. Thank you so much.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming. We've got a lot of information that's going to be jam-packed in the next hour or so. It is a webinar, so question and answers, like you said, will be at the end. I hope you guys get some value out of this. So Reliance Partners. Reliance Partners is an insurance broker. We provide insurance solutions to companies with assets, motor carriers in the United States. Me personally, I used to be a state patrol inspector. I was an investigator with the federal government. I worked for the FAA as a hazmat specialist. I'm now the VP of Risk Services at Reliance Partners. And what we want to do is have everybody who joined the webinar gain information. So anybody that came on, by the time this webinar is over, we're hoping that you have more information than you came to the webinar with. So now, before we get into a webinar about hours of service and how to increase our profits by reducing our costs, we can't forget the fact that safety is of the utmost importance. So when I was an investigator at FMCSA, it was back in 2007, which is the better part of 11 years ago, I saw an article come across my desk from a company like FreightWaves. This is being brought to you by. And this is a driver that got in a crash. And this is a family. It's the Coble family. And all three of them lost their lives because of driving too fast for conditions and inattentive. When I saw this online, I immediately said, come downstairs. And this picture over on the right are my kids. Now, the parents of the Coble family was a stay-at-home mom driving a Chrysler Town & Country minivan. At the same exact time, my wife was a stay-at-home mom driving a Chrysler Town & Country minivan. I'm not kidding here. People that know me personally, Katie here was 2 years old in 2007. Today, she would be 13 years old. This daughter over here, her name is Katie also. This is my daughter. So when you think about that, when I saw this, it was like my family in a sense. So this is what drives me to give you this information. Sure, we want to make as much money as possible. Sure, we want to reduce our costs, but we all want to do it the right way. So what do we need to do to increase revenue? Let's just say in simple terms, we need to keep our wheels moving. The more our wheels are going down the road, the more money we can make. Now, before we get into all this, you have to realize, and everybody on the call knows, that if you didn't have onboard recorders in the past, paper logs. How did we keep our logs moving? Keep our vehicles moving with paper logs? A lot of people just lied. You fudged your logs. You didn't follow the regulations to a T. Can you do that now? There are ways to do that, but you will get caught, especially with ELDs and GPS and the technology in the truck. So now if we can keep our wheels moving, then when our wheels aren't moving, we need to manage that non-driving time. So how do we maintain the most efficient way to manage our off-duty sleeper berth and on-duty statuses? That's the big bulk of the beginning of this webinar, right? So now, how do we do that? We use the hours of service to our advantage. Now, what FMCSA has been doing, and I find this very interesting given I work there, is the hours of service were set in the regulation. Then ELDs came and the hours of service were still set in the regulation. Now that the ELDs are here and everybody has felt a capacity crunch, the industry is seeing FMCSA add some flexibility to the hours of service. Freightways Magazine, which is a co-sponsor of this, has put some really unique articles out, like with drivers feeling constrained with ELDs, there's a flexibility crunch. There's new guidance that came out in the last month on agricultural and personal conveyance. Flexible sleeper berth. There's a pilot project going on right now to add options to flexible pilot project for the sleeper berth. There's a bill that's coming out via Congress, actually many of them, that are trying to add the flexibility. So what's nice is the federal government, whether it be Congress or FMCSA, both of them are understanding that there's a flexibility issue with the hours of service. And what we're going to be talking about is how you can use some of the hours of service to add the flexibility that FMCSA understands many companies are facing. Now, you have two options. You can take the knowledge, actually three options. You can take the knowledge you have right now and run with it. Or you can increase the level of knowledge and change the way you operate so you can take advantage of some of the things that FMCSA has coming down the pipe. Now, Freightways does a great job, but they won't cover every single thing in a news article that might be advantageous to a company. A lot of times they'll cover it only when it becomes a final rule and someone thinks it's a good article. Now, instead of that, everybody on the call, take this note, go to federalregister.gov. And the best way to go about it is to go to Google, type in federalregister.gov space FMCSA for Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. FMCSA has their own unique page on the federal website for federalregister.gov. And when you get to this page, right here where it says subscribe, enter in your email information. They will send you proposed rulemakings, guidance changes, Federal Register updates, so you can gain that knowledge as you go. So rely on Freightways, rely on, the truck stop lawyer, which is a bad idea, or take the initiative to sign up for this and track this information yourself. So now, what's the purpose of what we're going to do over the next, half an hour, talking about hours of service and how you can use them to your advantage, maybe in a way you've never thought of. It all has to do with monitoring this hours of service via that Federal Register. So now, let's do a recap of the hours of service. I'm assuming everybody on the call understands the hours of service as it relates to the 11, 14, or 70-hour rule. Now, the 60-hour rule is used only for companies that do not dispatch trucks 7 days a week. If you're dispatching and running trucks 7 days a week, you'll generally fall under the 70-hour rule. So with the 11, the 14, the 70, just to recap, if you start at 6 a.m. for the 11 to 14, you can't drive after 8 p.m. So I'll say it again. If you start at 6 a.m., you cannot drive, that's a key word, drive after 8 p.m. Now, in that 14-hour window, you cannot drive more than 11 hours. Same thing goes with the 70-hour rule. You take today and the previous 7 days, accumulate all your line 3 and 4, driving and on duty, not driving. You cannot drive after you hit 70 hours in 8 days. Now let's go to the 30-minute break. If you start at 6 a.m. by 2 p.m., say it again, at 6 a.m. by 2 p.m. you cannot drive until you take a 30-minute break. When I say drive, I mean drive on a highway. I'm not talking about driving in a yard, in a shipper yard, which could be used as yard moves, which we're going to cover. I'm talking about driving on a highway. So with the 11, the 14, the 70, and the 30-minute break, you cannot drive on a highway once you hit these hours. But, and here's the regulation below. It says, no motor carrier shall drive having been on duty 70 hours. This is the regulation from the regulation book. The driver does not drive after the 14th hour. There's no driving after 8 hours have passed. So now, I'm going to give you a real-life example of how this would benefit you. Let's say you start at 6 a.m. and 2 p.m. rolls around. And the average driver thinks, I got to take my 30-minute break right now. But you happen to be at a shipper. And you're at the shipper and you look and all the dock doors are open. You can back up to one right now and unload. And you know that if you wait 30 minutes, there's going to be 12 trucks in line. If it qualifies as a yard at that shipper or receiver, can you get onto their facility, push yard move, and then drive in the on-duty not driving status because you're not on a highway? The answer is yes. So if you start at 6 a.m. and you get there at 2 p.m., you have not taken a 30-minute break. you can actually load and unload for the next 2 hours in on-duty status, even if you're driving around, as long as it qualifies as a yard. Now, what do you need to do before you leave? You need to take a 30-minute break. You need to take a 30-minute break at that shipper yard and then go sleep or off duty and then drive away. Now, did you drive at the 10th hour? The answer is yes. Is that legal? The answer is yes. How many drivers understand that? Some do, a lot don't. When I do driver meetings, I try to educate them on that. How could you use the 70-hour rule? Let's say you're an owner-operator and you go Monday through Friday and you hit 70 hours. And then on Saturday, you want to turn a wrench by working on your truck. Can you go to the shop in a yard, drive your truck around and work on your truck for 10 hours? So you actually hit 80 hours in your log in the 8 days. Is that legal? Yes, because you did not drive after the 70. You were on duty working on your truck. So don't work on your truck, lie, and not put it in your log. Put it in your log. 14-hour rule is the same thing. Let's say you are out and you get back to your yard, your terminal, and you're done for the day. But you want to wash your truck, fuel your truck, drop that trailer, and hook up to the one to prepare for tomorrow. And it takes an hour. Can you put 15 hours in your logbook? The answer is yes, as long as you're in a yard at your facility and you did not drive after the 14th hour. I have a trucking company right in Union Grove, Wisconsin, and they are utilizing this to their advantage to help prepare for the next day, to help get unloaded when there's constraints at places, etc. So these are some things that you can use. Now, hours of service exemption. These are ELD exceptions. These things will make it so you don't need an ELD. If you are a 100 air mile or 150 air mile exempt driver, as long as you do not need logs filled out under the regulation for more than 8 days in a 30-day period, you're exempt from the rule. For example, let's say I have a guy that meets the 100 air mile radius every single day he works. He's always meeting all the criteria in the 100 air mile radius. That means 0 days does he need a logbook, which means he doesn't need an ELD. But let's say the next 30 days, 5 times he doesn't meet the exemption. That means those 5 times he needs to fill out a paper log, but he still doesn't need an ELD. Now the next 30 days, 10 times he doesn't meet the exemption. Now he needs an ELD for that 30 days. He can revert back to not running an ELD once he gets out of that 30-day period. It's kind of like tracking hours like you do your 70-hour rule. So that's one exception. Another one is drive away, tow away, delivering brand new vehicles. And another one is having an engine prior to the year 2000. I won't get into the history of this, but very interesting. If you read the ELD mandate and the regulation, it did not say engine year in the regulation. FMCSA changed the position on this through guidance and question and answer over the period of the last 2 years. And right now, the position of FMCSA is it's engine year regardless of the model year. So now, what is the 100 air mile radius? There's a fallacy out there, and I don't want my CSA scores high, and I don't want to make mistakes. There are 5 questions that make up the 100 air mile radius exemption. A lot of people think it's just 100 air miles, but that's not true. Now, 100 air miles is equivalent to 115 statute miles. Here's the 5 questions. Number 1, you have to stay within 100 air miles of the work reporting location. Number 2, you have to leave and return to the same spot and go home within 12 hours if you're using the 100 air mile. Now, the 100 air mile applies to CDL trucks and interstate commerce. Then you need 10 hours off. Well, obviously, you need 10 hours off. You can't drive more than 11 hours in that 12-hour period. Well, I'll tell you, if you're staying within 100 air miles, how are you getting over 11 hours of driving unless you're like a truck race driver, like a NASCAR? I'm just joking. Whatever. So then you need time records. Time start, time finish, total hours work. As long as you're recording time start, time finish, total hours work, you're good to go, right? You still need to follow the 11, the 14, the 70. However, you're exempt from a log on that given day. So now, over a 30-day period, if you don't need a log, meaning you meet these criteria, the majority of the time, which is defined by 8 days or less in 30, you don't need an ELD. Now, without going crazy, the one below it is the 150 air mile exemption. This is for vehicles not requiring a CDL. So if you cross state lines and you're in a vehicle that does not require a CDL, you get 50 extra miles, which is 172.5 on the odometer from location to location. You do not have to go home within 12 hours. you actually just have to return to the same location. So there's more flexibility with the 150 than there is the 100. So you can use this to your advantage, and you can go back and forth throughout the course of a year. Just because you needed an ELD for a 30-day period doesn't mean you can't take it out and then run with paper logs after that. So now, personal conveyance. Very interesting. If you think about this, 395.8, question number 26 is personal conveyance. Now, the federal regulation for hours of service has not changed as it relates to the definition of on-duty not driving. I'll say it again. It has not changed in the regulation. Here's what FMCSA did. Last December, they came out with a Federal Register asking for comments because they felt they needed to change the personal conveyance. They did change it recently within the last month, and now we have new guidance that I'm going to go over. What's just interesting as a trucking person to that is they didn't change the rule. So does that mean that changing the guidance now, applying it to the same underlying rule, does that mean that the old personal conveyance really was misguided? It's just an interesting caveat to think about. But let's skip about what it was in the past. Let's just focus on what it is now. If you are operating a CMV for personal conveyance, you will log that as off-duty. If you're relieved from work and all responsibility for performing work by the motor carrier, who decides if you are working or not? The motor carrier. Now, it used to be where you couldn't have freight. Now you can have freight. You can be laden. Since the load is not being transported, it's the benefit of the carrier. So the benefit of the carrier. Can you have freight in your motor carrier, your tractor in the trailer? Yes. But wherever you're going can't benefit the carrier based on what I'm about to explain. Here's the caveat, and I recommend this. Motor carriers motor carriers can, they're not required to, but they can establish personal conveyance limitations. They can be more restrictive than this guidance because remember, they're the ones that's relieving the driver. They could put a distance limitation. If it were me, I would say, we allow personal conveyance no more than X miles. You figure out based on your operation how far it's reasonable that your driver may go where there's a shipper or a receiver and there's a truck stop. Figure all that out, right? And then set the mileage at a little bit over that if you're comfortable with that from a liability perspective on the insurance side. Now, if you set it at that mileage and there's a circumstance that goes higher than that mileage, then put it in your company policy that anything in excess of that mileage amount will be handled on a case-by-case basis. So would I enter a limitation? Yes. Would I be more restrictive in some cases? Yes. But would I expand on that through a case-by-case basis if there's circumstances? Example, let's say you put 50 miles, but you get a brokered load from Arrive Logistics. Hey, there's the plug for Arrive. That's a joke. Anyway, so you get a load from them that's 56 miles from a truck stop. You get loaded. There's no other place. Can you go that far to the closest place to get adequate rest? Yes, there is no distance limitation. Now, you may think 56 is a lot. That's fine. Then set it at less than that. The big piece is you can't have fatigue, which we're going to cover in a little bit. So now, here is what the government did. They said, we're going to give you examples of appropriate uses. And you can use it for en route lounging to a motel or truck stop. Once you're there, then you can go to restaurants and entertainment facilities, right? You can go to a residence. Interesting, they did not say distance to the residence, so if it's your house. You can go to a nearby reasonable, safe location after loading and unloading. If you go to a truck stop and it's full, inspector might think that's the most reasonable stop. But if the truck stop's full, it's not reasonable. Tell your drivers to get a camera and do a panoramic view of the truck stop. Take the picture. So then when you're en route to the next truck stop and the inspector says, why didn't you go to the other truck stop? You have evidence in hand to say it wasn't reasonable because it was full. If your drivers are technology challenged, just have them take a series of pictures overlapping and you guys can turn it into a panoramic view, right? It does say that you have to go to the first such location that is reasonable and safe. Again, after loading and unloading. If you're at a truck stop and it's full, you could proceed to the next one by saying it wasn't reasonable because there's no place to park. So now the other four are at the request of a safety official, long overdue. They should have allowed law enforcement to be able to tell a driver to move for a law enforcement purpose and not have it affect his hours of service. Then I don't think we have many motor coach guys because Arrive, last time I checked, doesn't broker passengers. So there's some motor coach stuff in here, and you can use it to travel home from an off-site work location. That's more of a construction company. Now, before I move on, these are the 7 instances in which you can use personal conveyance, but it does say include, comma, but not limited to. This opens it up for subjectivity. So I wouldn't push the envelope like this, but you may have circumstances that don't fall within these 7. You can absolutely, as long as you can articulate it and explain it to an officer, use personal conveyance if it's closely related to this. I wish they would have been more direct and not opened it up with this include but are not limited to, but that's what we have. Now, this is situations that would not qualify. So they basically broke it down saying, here you can, here you can't. Where you can't is to enhance your operational readiness. You can't advance your position past a reasonable, safe location to get across the street from a shipper. Just because you're bobtailing doesn't automatically mean you're personal conveyance. You can't be in the business of picking up and dropping empty and loaded trailers and bobtailing back and call that personal conveyance. So bobtailing won't work. And then we have another one with passengers. Time spent transporting a CMV to a facility to have maintenance performed. You can't say, well, I'm done and now I'm going to go get my vehicle fixed and I'm having maintenance performed. After being placed out of service, I found this interesting. If you're placed out of service for hours of service, you can run personal conveyance off duty after you're placed out of service, which means you're over hours, if an officer says it's okay. I used to be an officer. I don't know if I'm going to open myself up to liability and let you run personal conveyance in an out-of-service condition to get to a truck stop. So I wouldn't count on that happening on a regular basis. Traveling to the terminal after loading or unloading. This is a tough one because you're allowed to go to the nearest reasonable safe place, but it says you can't go to the terminal. So then these contradict each other. What I would tell is if you get to a shipper and it's 4 minutes from your terminal, and the driver's not going to go home, but it's 4 minutes from your terminal, and the nearest location for a truck stop is 20 miles away. I do not believe the government intended for you to drive 20 miles away past your terminal when that's the nearest reasonable safe location. So these contradict each other. The only problem is who's pulling you over and will they agree with you? If I had a circumstance where a shipper's close to my terminal and there's no other place for him to get adequate rest, I would develop like a MapQuest map or a Google map and then pinpoint where the truck stop is. So when the inspector gets pulled over, you say, here, officer, I don't have any other reasonable place to park. My terminal is that nearest reasonable safe location. So, and then the last one's motor coach. So develop a personal conveyance policy, educate your drivers in a driver meeting to properly utilize this. If you don't follow personal conveyance properly, you could get false logs just like this, which is 7 points in your CSA. And when we talk about CSA, that becomes a problem. Now, even if you're using personal conveyance, even though the regulation allows for it, 392.3 says you can't operate ill or fatigued. Now, in the Walmart situation where Tracy Morgan crashed and the driver, and they said he was up for 25 hours, even though he was within the hours of service, he was fatigued because he had not gotten adequate rest. You can follow the hours of service, but if you don't get adequate rest, you could be in violation of 392.3, which that could cause problems with lawsuits and losses to your insurance and give you a violation for fatigue driver for your hours of service CSA score. So keep that in mind when developing these policies. Don't let a driver go 800 miles personal conveyance because they didn't put a mileage limitation and then turn around and let him drive because you have a responsibility to make sure he's not ill or fatigued. Now, yard moves. We just talked personal conveyance. Personal conveyance is driving the vehicle in the off-duty status. Prior to the EO mandate, did anybody use personal conveyance with paper logs? Not much because you just lied, right? It's not right. You shouldn't have falsified. We shouldn't have had comic books and fudge factors, etc. But we had it, and now that there's limitations with the EOD, you should adequately use personal conveyance, driving in the off-duty status. Yard moves here is driving your vehicle in the on-duty not driving status. So when can you use yard moves? When you're not driving on a highway. The definition in the regulation book is a road, street is a highway, or a way. A way? A way that's on public or private property. Now, pretend Arrive Logistics gives you a loan, you go to a shipper. Is it a way? Yeah, there are parking lots away. Is it on public or private property? Yeah, it's probably on private property. Is it open to the public? Open to the public means passable by a car. Can a car drive at that facility? Yes. However, if the facility has restricted gates and prohibitive signs, then it's not a highway. I'll say it again. If that yard, if that location that's not on a highway has restricted gates and prohibitive signs, even on private property, it is not a highway. So here's an example. Was this truck right here driven on a highway? Let's assume there's a prohibitive sign when he entered this facility saying not open to the public travel. Well, then yes, you can use yard moves here. Now this guy went from one location to another driving clearly on a road. Is this a highway? Yes, you would think it's a highway, but per the regulation it is. Can you use yard move here? No, you can't. You're driving on a highway. It's not a yard. If you try to use yard move driving in this right lower corner, it's a false log CSA 7 points. That would cause us problems. So properly use yard moves and personal conveyance. I'll say this, if you're not prepared from an education standpoint to use personal conveyance and yard moves based on what I've explained here, then don't do it. Stay with the 11, 14, 70, 30-minute break, 10 hours off, and if you're delayed at a shipper, so what? If they ask you to move within the yard and you're like, just don't do it. Now, how can this really be advantageous? I'll tell you. Let's say that you get to the yard at the 14th hour. Can you push yard move and make this delivery after the 14th hour to get the job done? The answer is yes. Did you drive after the 14th? No. Do many drivers think that's a violation? Yes, but it's not. That's kind of the purpose of this. Let's use these hours of service to our advantage so we can keep the wheels moving, manage our non-driving time like personal conveyance and yard move, etc., to our advantage. Now, vehicle motion. If you drive your vehicle under 5 miles an hour under the ELD mandate, that's not legal. There are many drivers out there that think that if they just creep around the lot in the off-duty status with a load working instead of using yard move, that's legal. I'll tell you what, when I was an investigator, I looked at the 30-minute breaks and I was like, okay, you started a 30-minute break at a shipper. You went off duty, you drove under 5 miles an hour. I saw in the GPS report you had movement the entire time of that 30-minute break. False log. Now, why would the government set this at 5 miles an hour under the ELD mandate? I don't know. It really should be 0. You shouldn't be moving around less than 5 miles an hour up the street and around the lot. Now, if you have an AOBRD, which is a grandfathered device and not an ELD, this 5 miles an hour doesn't apply. So you might have a device right now where you can exceed 5 miles an hour. I warn you, you should tell your drivers right now that 5 miles an hour is coming, because once the ELD mandate hits, every device in America will be 5 miles an hour. However, investigators will come in and roadside guys can find you trickling around under 5 miles an hour and give you a 7-point false log violation under your CSA. So now, here's a huge one, huge. I don't understand why drivers don't use this, but I'll tell you, my company in Union Grove, I just listened to their dispatcher yesterday when I stopped by to renew their insurance. There's the plug for Reliance, right? So I went to renew their insurance, and I heard their dispatcher saying, yeah, did you get an adequate 2-hour break earlier in the day? Yes. Well, now you're at a truck stop, right? Yep. Go into the sleeper berth, do 8 consecutive in the sleeper, and you can actually leave 2 hours earlier, right? So she was on top of it, explaining the split sleeper to them. Now, for the purposes of an hour, I'm not going to be able to educate you specifically on how this works because it's not simple. I did a webinar a month ago, and the person on the call listened and said, you really oversimplified that sleeper berth. It's because I only had an hour. Now, here's the big deal. Do you have to take 10 hours in a row off? No. If you look at the screen, is this 2 hours right here of off duty added to this 8 hours in the sleeper berth? Is this 10 hours consecutive off duty? The answer is yes, right? You can do this. Now, where the clock resets and when you can start over, not for this webinar. But I will tell you this. Let's say I start at 6 a.m. And let's say Evan, who's over there listening to me, right? Let's say he starts at 6 a.m. and we're going from East Coast to West Coast and we're starting at the same time, right? We leave at 6 a.m. At noon, we get to a truck stop together. He takes a 30-minute required break, and so do I. But I make mine 2 hours like you see right here. And he makes his a half an hour. Does he get to leave an hour and a half before me? The answer is yes. So now he drives, gets to his maximum hours, he gets to a truck stop. Now he needs to take 10 off. Well, fortunately for me, I'm an hour and a half behind him because I took 2 hours. He only took a half an hour. Now I get to the truck stop and I only have to take 8, which means I get to leave a half an hour before Evan. So he took a half an hour plus 10. I only took 10. I gained my half an hour back. That's one way. Another one is, let's say I'm coming from New York back to Wisconsin and I hit Indiana and I need a 10-hour break, but I had 2 hours off earlier. Now I can take 8. Instead of going through Chicago at 7 a.m., I can go through at 5 a.m. That's planning. So I'm enhancing my ability to use the hours of service. Now, how is this going to play in the future? The Hours Act, which Congress is getting involved, and FMCSA is doing a pilot project. They want to make this split sleeper not just 8 and 2, 8 and 2. They want to go 7 and 3, 6 and 4, 5 and 5, like it used to be in the old days for truckers, right? What's easier, to teach our drivers the 8 and 2 now, make them understand it. Then when they flip to the 7 and the 3, 6, it's less complicated because they're like, I got the 8 and 2. When you flip to the 5 and 5 and 6 and 4, this is easy. Now you're going to get drivers, a third of them will get it. A third of them will kind of get it, but not really. And a third of them, they just won't even understand it ever. So just make them take 10 hours off. The third that get it, let them use it. The third that don't get it, you could say, okay, dude, if you had 2 hours yesterday and you have an ELD, then get to your maximum hours, take 8 consecutive in the sleeper, turn your ELD on. If it gives you hours back, just say magic. And eventually your driver will understand how it works. This isn't for everybody, but I'll tell you, if I were a driver, I'd use it. How long has it been here? A long time with the 8 and 2. Has everybody used it with paper? No. Why? Because you just line it up, right? The 16-hour workday, this is more for a local company. If you leave and return to the same spot the last 5 duty tours. So let's just take last week. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which is 3 days. Then you had Saturday, Sunday off, Monday, Tuesday. Those are 5 previous duty tours. If you left and returned to the same spot, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, got the weekend off, and Monday, Tuesday, on Wednesday, you can do a 16-hour day. You can only do a 16-hour day once every 6 consecutive days unless there's a restart. So in this example, I did 3 of them last week. Then I had 2 days off. Then I had 2 Monday, Tuesday. Could I do a 16-hour day on Friday and turn around and do another one Monday? Yes. I can do more than 2 in 6 days as long as the previous 5 days, which was all the days last week, I left to return to the same spot. So can you go over the 14-hour once a week? Yes, if you meet this criteria. A lot of companies don't use that either. Now, adverse driving conditions. How long has this been on the books? As long as I remember. How many people use adverse driving conditions and emergency conditions? Barely any. Because if you really had weather that was unanticipated that held you up, i.e. adverse conditions, or a bad crash that held you up that was unanticipated, i.e. adverse conditions, if you had these with paper logs, you wouldn't record it. It's too big of an argument. Let's just lie. And let's just say that we only drove 11, even though it was 12, right? Can you now drive 2 hours past anything outlined in 395.3A or 395.5A, which is property and passenger, the hours of service, the 11:14 and the 30-minute break? The answer is yes. You can exceed 2 hours. Now, cameras. I promote cameras because it will help in reducing driver behavior issues. It will reduce your losses. It will make you safer. You know what it'll also do? If you're driving and there's an accident, it'll videotape your accident so when you get pulled over under adverse conditions, you can show the officer the videotape and say, look, there was a big crash. That's why I was delayed. Or look at this black ice when everybody was sliding off the road. I didn't slide off the road because I'm a good driver, right? So you can use these to your advantage. Now, a lot of ELDs won't have adverse conditions, proper personal conveyance, yard moves. That's something you have to work out with your vendor, or you can give me a call. I have some workarounds, but I'm not going to talk about that. When I say workarounds, I don't mean things that are illegal. I mean using your AOBRD to use some of these things. But a good case is if you're driving over hours and it puts you in violation, add a remark that says adverse conditions. If your device says you're over hours, but the regulation says you're not, are you over hours? No. So don't fear your device saying you have a violation when you truly don't, because you're knowledgeable about the rules. So should we use personal conveyance, split sleeper, yard moves, adverse conditions, 16-hour workdays, 100 air mile race? These are all things that will help you out. Now, not in the regulation, which is why you need to subscribe to FMCSA's website. There's going to be many exceptions to the rule coming out. FMCSA is pretty free. I'm not saying completely, but pretty free with adding flexibility for the hours of service. The Truck Renting and Leasing Association is an example of this. Can you rent a vehicle 8 days or less and not have to have an ELD? The answer is yes, right? It's a limited exemption, but if you have a truck with an ELD that you normally use and it breaks down and you're going to rent one for 5 days, can you run paper for that 5 days? The answer is yes. Thank you, Truck Renting and Leasing Association. If you just got word of this at the end, you would have known this was happening if you had subscribed to federalregister.gov or read the articles that Freightways puts out, because they're very good at doing so, right? So now, here's the fallacy. The Federal Register, again, this isn't in the regulation. The Federal Register says this exemption is for 5 years, 8 days or fewer, but you need a copy of the Federal Register or equivalent signed exemption document. What? What's an equivalent signed exemption document? Skip that. Get a copy of the Federal Register and stick it in the truck for any rental 8 days or less. If you rent from a large rental company in the United States of America, I'll give a plug for an old company of mine, Roldy Brothers in Wisconsin. Big private leasing company in southeastern Wisconsin. They were a customer of mine. I said, listen, you want to make your customers happy? Attach a copy of the Federal Register to every rental agreement that's 8 days or less. Are there rental companies out there right now that are renting you vehicles 8 days or less, and they don't know they should be giving you this document? And if you don't have it, can you get an inspection? Boo! They pull you over and say, you missed the term of the exemption that you have a copy of the Federal Register. Here's your violation for no ELD because you're running paper logs. Who thinks that's chicken garbage? I do, but you know what? Doesn't matter, because that's what the regulation says. That's what the guidance says. If they're going to give an exemption, you have to understand what it says. You need a copy of the rental agreement. Well, that's obvious because Part 376 requires it. You have to possess the copies for the previous 7 days. So if you're running Platform Sciences ELD, and Platform Science, you can print the logs and hand them to the driver, then he rents a vehicle, then you're good, right? Now, agricultural exemption. There's a lot of contention with this. The ag guys love it. The safety groups don't. How does this work? If you pick up agricultural commodities, for example, here in Illinois, which is Manitou, Illinois, right? Or actually, Manitou, Illinois. Manitou, Illinois, you pick up some agricultural commodities. You're going to drive them all the way up here into Wisconsin, right? Well, at this location right here, this is 150 air miles. So everything within 150 air miles of Manitou, if you have agricultural commodities, no matter where you're going, is now off duty if you're coming from the source. So what I did is I took Manitou and I made this little red part. This is within 150 air miles. See the border? The border's right up here where this dot is. As long as you're in the red, you're off duty. Once you hit the red, then you can start your 14-hour clock if you're hauling agricultural. Same company out of Union Grove, my customer that's using the yard moves and the split sleeper and the personal conveyance, they also haul potatoes. So they're using this for their potato hauling. And we have a white paper in their truck, so when pulled over, they say, here it is, we're exempt, and this is why, right? So what they do is they'll drive from this location, get to this exit, go over here to the Menards or the Walmart or Starbucks. Starbucks is always good. I probably can't park the truck there, but they get to that location and they start their work day. Prior to that, they have ag exemption, right? So then they can come all the way up, running the 14-hour break, come back. If they're empty coming back, they can go off duty all the way back to the source. If they're empty, take a break, go off duty all the way back, and then run it again. Now, time permitting, I'm not getting into the definition of source. You gotta go to the federalregister.gov, read the definition of source, because that's a whole nother training session. So now that we've covered quite a bit, what do we want to do to make money in trucking? We want to make as much money as possible. How do we do that? Wheels going around in circles. When they're not going around in circles, let's try to get them to go around in circles as fast as possible. How do we do that? Should we, as an example, get to a shipper, let's say start at 6 a.m. and at 2 p.m., I cancel, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. I get there at 8 p.m. Should I wait 10 hours to unload? No. I should go yard move and unload, then take 10 hours. You get what I'm saying? That would be an effective way to use our hours of service. If you're driving and you get delayed for 3 hours and then you finish your day, now you're going to take 10 at the truck stop. Why would you take 10 when you can take 8 and grab 2 of the 3 hours that you were delayed earlier because you weren't working, you were sitting in the break room? And a lot of drivers will do is they'll drive, get delayed for 3, drive, take 10. That's 13 hours. Did you know that you only had to take 10, actually 11, because it would have been the 2 plus the 1 plus the 8, and then you start? Now, again, you have to research where your clock restarts. Thank you, company in Wisconsin that called me and said, hey, John, you blew right over that sleeper berth on a previous webinar. So now, we want to reduce our costs. How do we reduce our costs? What are the top 4 costs in trucking? Insurance, and insurance is one of the most controllable costs you have. Payroll. You got to pay a driver. You got to pay them a living wage or they're going to quit. There's a driver shortage. They move around. Turnover's high. You got to pay them a good amount of money. So it's hard to save money on payroll. But guess what? You know how you can save money on payroll? Add to the driver flexibility. Even if you're paying him less per mile, but he can get more miles because you're allowing him to use some of the things I talked about already. That's a recruiting tool. Hey, dude, we let you use a split sleeper. We're advocates of personal conveyance. Yard moves are a good thing. We're 100 air mile radius guys. We won't put an ELD. You got a 99 truck, good with us, but then monitor their safety. You know what I'm saying? So you can do these things. Then you have better recruitment, and you might be able to pay them less per mile and get more work done. Where in the end, they're going to make more money even though you're paying them less per mile. Fuel costs. With ELDs, you can monitor hard braking, speeding, idle time. All those things should be done through your ELDs if you have an effective. Like an example, I got this company called Platform Science. They have really good, effective reports that show these things: speeding, hard braking, efficiency reporting, etc. So control your fuel costs. And then maintenance costs. Preventative maintenance is a big thing. But of these 4, what do you think is probably the most controllable? Where one act or a couple things happen, or your CSA scores go up, you get a conditional rating, you have losses. Which is the most susceptible to increased costs? It's probably insurance, right? A truck is a truck, fuel is fuel, a tire is tire, a light bulb is a light bulb, right? So to control your insurance costs, what do you need to do? Control your CSA score. So now, I'll tell you what, prior to the ELD mandate and people were running paper, anybody that had a computer log in their truck, they're good because they didn't have missing logs, they didn't have logs not current, they didn't have form and manner as much. Most inspectors are like, I don't want to look at that thing. Now that the mandate's here, we don't have missing logs as much. FMCSA put out data on their website that there's been a reduction in the number of hours of service violations nationwide. So what does that put you in? It puts you in a bad place for CSA because now chicken garbage, I see that again, violations like form and manner. Just because you didn't put a bill of lading, is that going to make you crash? Probably not. Just because you didn't put a number on there showing what load you had isn't going to make you safe or less safe. But I'll tell you what, if your drivers aren't putting it on there, your CSA score is going up. In-cab information, blank set of logs, right? If you're running a good ELD that doesn't malfunction and it's easy to access, what do you even need the instructions for or blank set of logs for a malfunction, right? If it does malfunction, you have to use the days of logs and reconstruct the log for the period of malfunction. If you have a bad ELD, it's always malfunctioning. You're constantly supposed to be filling out paper logs. You know how many violations I see from companies that have malfunctions and they're not filling out paper logs? I'll tell you, the cheaper route is to crap can your bad ELD and go buy a new one. Buy one that actually works. Because if your drivers are fighting through using the ELD properly, you're like, I made the capital investment. I don't want to lose a bunch of money from what I spent. You know how much your insurance is going to go up if you have alerts and hours of service and speeding and vehicle maintenance and you can't control some of these things like fuel costs, etc. It's not going to help you. So now I'm not saying this is everything at roadside. Obviously, you can't be over the 11, the 14, the 70, the 30-minute break. Obviously, you can't improperly use personal conveyance, yard move, split sleeper, the 16-hour day, the 100 air mile radius exemption. You can't do that because those are false logs. But if you control all those and you control your hours of service and everybody has a good ELD, wouldn't it stink to end up in the alert because you didn't put a bill of lading or a trailer number, right? If you have a dispatching system, it might auto-populate the bill of lading and trailer number, thus less violations, meaning get rid of your crappy ELD and go get a dispatching system, potentially if you're big enough, and have it integrate with the ELD. Again, Call me if you have questions on some of this, right? Now, insurance costs. These are 2 true emails from underwriters that we at Reliance Partners got in the last week, right? Thank you for your opportunity to review this motor carrier risk. We controlled this risk in the past and it was canceled and unscheduled, meaning they didn't tell them about all the trucks, blah, blah, blah. But their overall safety has not improved. Very high CSA scores, that's what SMS is, a conditional rating, and high loss frequency. We only have so many trucking markets. If you give the underwriter a picture of your company with a conditional rating, high CSA, and losses, it's not going to be pleasant for you in controlling your costs. Now, here's what I'll tell you. Unless you think the government's off their rocker, if you don't have CSA scores in the alert, that means you're compliant. That means at roadside, they're not finding violations. And if FMCSA actually has any teeth to it, it should be, if you don't have violations, you'll have less losses. So you can control your violations, reducing your CSA, which should inherently reduce your losses. Not with every violation. Again, bill lating, no, but running 20 hours in a row, sure, right? So control your CSA, it controls your losses. How do you keep out of a conditional rating? Don't get a review. How do you get a review? High CSA, a fatality, or a complaint. Treat your stakeholders properly. Don't kill somebody because you're safe. Now, I get it. It can happen to anybody. We've shown that in the past, but control that. So now, there was another one called Seidl Transportation. That's me. It doesn't fit because CAB, which is a third-party entity that insurance underwriters use, CSA was 71% and 83. 2 severe violations. They're a chameleon. When they had high scores, they just got another DOT number. They had a serious violation, 15 out of services. They're above the national average, blah, blah, blah. So control your CSA and you will save a lot of money. I'll tell you, Arrive won't give you freight if you're conditional or you have 4 alerts. They'll be like, go to Renegade Broker. Now, are you going to get as good a rates? No. So now you can't even make as much money from revenue because you're not controlling your costs. Now, to see your CSA in the proper way, please, everybody on this webinar, go to this website and log in and get an account to the FMCSA portal. A lot of people have a login to the SBS 150 with a DOT number and a PIN. Then they'll have a DataQ login, and then they'll have the ANI CSA login, and they have all these logins, right? The portal is a one-stop shop that has access to all the different areas in which you will need to monitor your CSA scores and your safety. The problem with CSA is it doesn't hit the CSA system for the better part of 5 or 6 weeks. If a driver gets a violation and doesn't tell you, you may not know it until after their court date. You had no idea what's happening. What's nice about the portal with an ID and password, and you log into this website right here, you can actually monitor your activity within the last 24 hours. See in this bottom right-hand corner where it says inspections last 24 hours? If the driver doesn't give you the report, you'll know within 24 hours so you can take proper action for his bad behavior. In addition, court dates are usually 3-4 weeks out. If you don't know the violation happened and he paid his ticket and they closed the court case, you can't even fight the ticket, which could help with DataQs in your CSA management, you see? So I implore everybody on the call, log into the portal and routinely put an Outlook reminder. And every Monday, go in and look to see if someone got pulled over last week and they didn't tell you, right? Now, up here where it says ANI SMS, it's an automatic link to your CSA score. It gives you all your information. Here, you can update your NCS 150. There's something called a company profile. When the government comes and knocks on your door, they bring a company profile, which shows your CSA scores all the way back to 2009. You can click on this tab and get a report that you used to have to pay for, and it's free. Here's a DataQ link. You can go on this DataQ link and do DataQs. Now, CSA, this is a trucking company of mine in Wisconsin. Very impressive that they have over 100 trucks with a 2% unsafe driving. I'm going to break CSA down real quick. And I know time's of a concern with this webinar, but who cares? We're learning a bunch of cool stuff, right? So these are the basics. The government takes all roadsides and breaks them into these basics. Unsafe driving, crashes, your logbook, vehicle maintenance, controlled substance, hazmat, driver fitness. And then they take all this, they put it in a big formula, and they spit out these numbers. What this number basically says to me is 2% of the companies, the size of this one, which is 100 and some trucks in Kenosha, Wisconsin, 2% of the companies are better than this one in the whole United States. This is one of the best companies with how the drivers operate their vehicles in the entire United States, right? Because they're at 2%. Some companies have 0. So we don't want any of these percentages to lead to this little triangle called an alert. This company doesn't have any. This little triangle leading to alert means dunk, 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 dunk. Here's your conditional rating if you're not controlling your hours of service or your vehicle maintenance, etc. To keep them out of our grill and out of our company, let's not have these little triangles here by controlling our CSA. Now, hours of service for this company is 42%. Now, they don't take all these violations. They even break these basics into different peer groups. That's why I said of this size. So companies with about 100 and some trucks, 42% are better than this company. I'll say it again. 42% of the companies are better than my company in Kenosha, right? At hours of service nationwide. Who thinks that CSA can be a flawed system? I do. Do the brokers understand this? Not a lot of times. Does Arrive? Sure. Does Reliance? Yes. Do our underwriters? Sometimes no, but we educate them. What am I going to educate you on? Ready for this? You got to be kidding. A company with 140 trucks, 130 trucks, in 2 years has had 4 out of service violations in 2 years, and that's driving the 42%. How is this data an accurate reflection of whether that company's safe or not? 42%. Now, their problem is they didn't used to be 42%, but they had one driver that didn't take a 30-minute break. In this case, he thought he was a 100 air mile radius guy, which is exempt from the 30-minute break, but he wasn't that day and he got caught. He made a mistake, but it killed our CSA score. Then we had another driver who we should have never hired. Should have never hired him. He had a false log. We got rid of him right away, but now we have to suffer through this for 2 years. Now, see this time weight? This time weight is any violation in the last 6 months is times 3. Anything times 2 is 6 to 12 months old, which you see here, there's none. Then any violation with a time weight of 1 is the entire 12 to 24 months ago. It takes 24 months to drop this off. So in August of this year, we're going to lose 7 points. Too bad we gained all these. Why has our company score gone up dramatically in the last few months? Because within 4 or 5 weeks, we had 2 guys make a mistake. We can't be complacent. We got to be aggressive with driver meetings and everything else. Because with 100 drivers with turnover, we can't have a few bad apples, right? So that's how this works. And their score ended up going up because of it. Now, DataQs. There are grandfathered onboard recorders. AOBRD was written in 1988. In 1988, they wrote AOBRD rule. If you had AOBRD installed prior to 1980, or I'll say the regulation was written in 1988. If you installed an AOBRD prior to December of 17, you're grandfathered for all the ELD-capable devices and the AOBRDs you had installed or bought, and you can still run AOBRD software. So what did the government say? The government said that a grandfathered AOBRD is exactly what I just said. They also said that law enforcement can only enforce 395.15 for AOBRDs. They can only enforce ELD requirements for those companies with an ELD. So if you're currently grandfathered and you've been violated for any of these sections, you potentially, not in all cases, you potentially can do a DataQ challenge. Now, what's a DataQ? Go to the portal and you click on DataQ, it'll bring you here. You can get copies of inspections, challenge inspections. Now, here's a couple examples. A lot of people don't understand this, but if you get a citation, which if you're monitoring the roadsides efficiently, you'll notice, if you get a citation and it gets adjudicated in court, if it's convicted of the original charge, they're not going to remove it, right? If it's dismissed, they're not going to remove it if you paid a fine or penalty. But if it's dismissed without a fine or penalty, you do a DataQ, they'll remove the ticket. If you're not guilty, they'll remove the violation. If you're convicted of a lesser charge, they'll take the violation and remove it to something else. Now, I'll tell, and if you're convicted of something else, they'll remove the violation and the points, and they'll turn it into 1 point in your CSA. So now let's talk about this. If you have a workers' comp claim, you want to manage that workers' comp by preventing it from happening, make sure you get returned to work, and then wait for the guy to come back to work and that his injury is good. That's how we handle workers' comp. How should you handle CSA? Prevention. Let's not have a violation. Once we have it, DataQ is like managing a workers' comp claim. This is managing your CSA. If you can't do it, DataQ, then you just got to let it expire and wait the 2 years. Now, you can read through this a little bit, but I just did a DataQ for a company of mine. I'm trying to write their insurance, and they have an alert. This DataQ removed their unsafe driving alert because of a cell phone, 8 percentage points overnight because we challenged this. What was the nature of this? The driver got pulled over and the officer said he looked at his phone and grabbed his hands-free. In the regulation, it just says you can't have your cell phone in your hand and push more than a button, right? To do voice communications or text. But if you read the Federal Register on federalregister.gov, read through this later. Very interesting. And a copy's available through Arrive Logistics. We'll send it to you. Email us. Let us know, right? Might even be posted on our website. Is that true, Evan? Will even be posted on our website. You read through this, and what it basically says is the Federal Register said, we didn't really mean using a cell phone is reaching for your hands-free next to you and putting it on your ear. You can do that, but the officer didn't know it. But look at the date. It took this company 2 years and 4 months. 2 years and 4 months to do the DataQ. Why? Not cancel. I'm sorry, wrong. 1 year and 4 months to do the DataQ. Why did it take them 1 year and 4 months? Because I didn't knock on their door. Now, I can't knock on all the people's doors that are on this call. So there's a company down here called CDL Consultant that I use on a regular basis. Here's their website, and here's their phone number. They help with upgrades. They help with managing your CSA data. Do you need them? No. You can do it if you have the resources available, but if you're small and you don't have the resources, contract with them. If you're really wanting to help out, sign your insurance up with Reliance Partners and we'll help you, right? So there's a plug to Reliance. Look at all these plugs. Now, pre-employment screening program. Your CSA scores control your costs, but they always say stock market. Past history of a stock is a predictor of the future. They say in wars, if you don't want to get into a new war, research history and think about the old wars, and maybe we won't go to war, right? So if you're knowledgeable about the history, you'll actually be better off going forward. So if a driver worked for Evan Transportation, and he had a bunch of CSA violations where there were no tickets, but they're not on his MVR, but they're on his PSP. Pay the $10 for this and find out who you're putting in your truck. I understand there's a driver shortage, but if he's that bad, don't do it. Or if you have a discipline policy, use previous stuff in his PSP to elevate him in your discipline policy to a different level. FMCSA says using this lowers your crash rate by 8%, that's losses. Driver out of service rates by 17. That means our rates, our loads are there on time, Evan. Woohoo! And our CSA isn't an issue. That's why you want to enroll in this. Now, here's the deal. I had to stay within 2 hours. I'm at 1 hour and 57 minutes. I went through a lot. My information is in one of the beginning slides with my email or my phone number. Call Arrive, call FreightWaves, call Platform Science if you want. That's one of the devices in the slide. Call CDL. Call all of us, and we're here to help. Or challenge your stakeholders now, your current brokers, your current agent, your current representatives to help you improve your business. So why? We can make as much money, pay as little in costs, and at the same time, save Katie Coble and her brother and sister and my Katie from a crash, right? So there's my bandwagon. I appreciate your time. Questions? Sorry we went to the end.
That's all right. You did an awesome job. We got a lot of nice questions here. I would, again, encourage people to use, shoot us emails. My email is epundyk, EPUNDYK @arrivelogistics.com. And we'll send the answers there. Someone is asking, we need more help with the split logs. I would encourage them to maybe shoot you a specific email or call so they could you could take the time to answer that complex area.
I would say my email's in the beginning, my phone number's there. It'll take me approximately, you know, if you're pretty sharp, it'll take me maybe 15, 20 minutes if you have a paper log in front of you. And we can work through that. Listen, when I'm driving my car, I can sit there and listen to Eminem on the radio, and I like rap, whatever. It gets me going and do stuff like it. It's good, right? Or I can talk to you and help you improve your company. Hands-free, obviously, but yes, give me a call.
We got a question. What is the website for Arrive? It is arrivelogistics.com. In the next 24 hours, there will be a page with this recording and a copy of the slides for anyone that is interested in coming back, giving it another look or listen. So we have what is the best place to look for freight in today's market? It seems like more an Arrive question rather than a John question, unless you got an answer for it.
I mean, what I would say is small companies, you have to use brokers because a lot of shippers won't contract with you directly because you're too small. Bigger companies can garner some shipper contracts specifically, but you better be clean. You better have good loss history. You better have good CSA scores. You can't have bad ratings. And even in those cases, it's very difficult to get these shipper agreements because of the effective approach that Arrive Logistics or some other brokers have to organizing this freight for shippers and taking care of their needs on a national level.
Well, yeah, I would say, again, shoot me an email, and it's EPUNDYK@ArriveLogistics.com, and we can try and get you some.
And some interesting things about Arrive is they have this direct payment program. They'll talk to you about that. They have some guaranteed freight rate programs. They'll talk to you about that. They're very innovative. And the reason I say they're innovative is because how many brokers are out there hiring an ex-DOT guy, inspector guy, trucking guy to come here and improve their carriers so their carriers can make more money. A lot of people think that brokers are all about shippers and receivers. Not us. We want you to make as much money as possible because a happy carrier does the job for us. And you might put us above and beyond some of your other brokers because of the value adds we bring.
Will this presentation be distributed via email? Yes, I'm going to take all the emails that I collected from the registration and make sure that everyone gets a copy. Do you have a monthly magazine that we mail out? Again, FreightWaves is really the publication partner of this. They do an excellent job. They've got a ton of great articles. I know that Arrive also makes a lot of wonderful collateral, and I'd be happy to.
And I'll tell you, FreightWaves works directly with Arrive Logistics and Reliance Partners. We have specific contract with FreightWaves to get this information out there. So we don't have internal newsletters. You're using a third party with a lot of database and availability to carriers to help promote this message and shippers and receivers.
I'm starting out with less than 12 months of being a broker. Any tips on moving freight? Well, at Arrive, we have a very long training process, so it'd be hard to sum up very quickly, but at a high level, I wrote you directly, but I said that, we try and put our carriers first. I think John knows that that's true. Programs like this, where we're trying to do added value, making sure that our carrier partners are happy, well-informed, because without strong carriers, a modern, high-quality 3PL just can't operate. So again, if you want to shoot me an email with more specific questions, I would be happy to dive into that. All right, someone also commented, taking pictures of the truck stop. That's brilliant. So appreciate that, Matthew.
Yeah. And don't forget the thing too about the cameras. Cameras can help support yard moves because you'll see the restricted gates. Can help support personal conveyance because it'll show what truck stop you went to. So cameras are a good thing too.
Awesome. Well, that looks like it's it. I've already gotten a lot of emails requesting the presentation. I love that. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This was a really great turnout, and I think it was just a really excellent presentation by John. So thank you, John.
I appreciate you guys too. Listen, we want to make as much money as possible, as safe as possible, and control our costs. That's the American dream, and that's how we take care of our employees and their families and make sure everybody gets home for dinner at that night. And I'll tell you, I get goosebumps when I talk about this global family and my family because this is what drives me. And if you don't care about my Katie or their Katie, you have your own Katie that you should care about. So make sure that drives you in setting up your company and policies and don't push the envelope.
Excellent. And again, thank you, FreightWaves, and thank you, Reliance. Excellent partners in this.